In connection with the attack on the United States, the Lord told his prophet there would be an attempt to overthrow the country by destroying the Constitution. Joseph Smith predicted that the time would come when the Constitution would hang, as it were, by a thread. And at that time, this people will step forth and save it from the threatened destruction. It is my conviction that the elders of Israel, widely spread over the nation, will at that crucial time successfully rally the righteous of our country and provide the necessary balance of strength to save the institutions of constitutional government. Now is the time for us to get ready.
Welcome to the Nauvoo Legion podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Nauvoo Legion podcast. I'm super excited today. We're gonna have a little bit of a face reveal. Latter-day Avenger here. So
Yep.
he makes the best. He honestly makes the best reels, spiciest memes out there on Mormagram. So yeah, I don't know. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little about you and why you kind of started your page and all that.
Yeah, so I originally had a history page. I guess, okay, so about my personal life. So my name's Rob Roy. I studied history at BYU, so I'm pretty versed in like church history. I'm pursuing a PhD. I specialize in like military history as well. I served in the military. I did a year in active duty, and I'm in the National Guard right now. So that's kind of my professional background. What started that Avenger page was I had a history page that was just kind of like secular history. And then so on TikTok I was monetized, right? And then I got banned. I don't really know why. The reasons were unclear. And then I just kind of thought like, well, maybe I should focus more on the gospel and maybe tying history to the gospel. So I started the page just kind of for myself, like to kind of occupy my time with more, spiritual things. And then it kind of started going off a bit more than my original history page. So that's kind of the start. My page kind of tries to tie history to modern politics and modern events that kind of pertain to the gospel. So
Yeah, no, it's awesome, dude. I love it. That's when I had started my page, that's some similar reasons. It was like, you know, I saw everything with the current political atmosphere and everything that's going on, and I wanted to kind of tie it into, the gospel as well as like historical events that have happened. So I did want to ask you though a little bit more on like you, like, so why do you choose to go into the military? What kind of led you down that path? And then like kind of why you chose to study history and all that type of stuff.
yeah, so it was kind of like a family tradition. So like I was looking at my family tree one day and I saw that my great 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 grandpa was in the army. I looked at my great great grandpa, and then all the way down to my dad. They were all in uniform, and I was just kind of like, "Am I going to be the guy that really ends this line?" It was just kind of like a family tradition, and I didn't have any like relationship obligations after I graduated from BYU. I thought I kind of want to take a gap in between doing a bachelor's and a PhD. So I was just like, why not enlist? So I enlisted as a combat engineer. I was at Fort Leonard Wood. It kind of gave me some like, more real world blue collar, experience. And like, I feel like academia kind of gets detached from reality in a lot of ways. And I felt like the military really opened my eyes and to kind of just the reality of the world. And so that was why I did it. History has always been a passion of mine. So I kind of intend to keep doing both, like kind of be a warrior scholar, I guess, just stay in the National Guard, maybe do some activations here and there. But I also want to like dive into history. So
No, that's awesome, dude. Yeah, I in my family, my dad didn't serve, but my grandpa did a little stint in the army in like the 70s. They used to let you do like 2-year just do it for like 2 years. He did that, and then he went in, and then he became a police officer afterwards.
Oh,
And then
cool.
my great grandpa, he served in the Korean War. He was a Marine. So I don't have probably don't have as much as you, right?
Hmm.
But for me, I always, that's always been a source of strength, knowing like I come from people who, fought for this country. So
Yeah.
I think it's awesome. Um, but anyways, yeah, dude, that's cool. I think right now we need a lot of like historians, like people who have this fire for the truth, because we get told there's a lot of lies that get told by historians, even, not like
Yeah.
history is written by the victors. And so, well, I know me recently, like a lot of things I've had to go back recently with the whole political atmosphere, and ask myself, was I really taught the true history, or was that just like some narrative that they told me?
Yeah, no,
Um,
exactly.
what
And
have
I
you
think
found in your studies, like things like that?
um so I guess my point of view is like I feel like, and this is kind of goes into church culture, not like, the core doctrine of the gospel.
Yeah.
I think we as Latter-day Saints have a very like militant warrior kind of history that we kind of shy away from, as saints. We kind of have this modern image of singing hymns in the streets and making birdhouses and giving cookies to our neighbors. But back in the day, it wasn't, things were pretty crazy back then. And I remember what kind of got me into this was I was reading about Joseph Smith, and I read that like he had a pistol and he was defending himself, and he according to some accounts shot somebody in the shoulder. And I was like, how come that wasn't in the restoration film? Like, what is this Nauvoo Legion thing? And then, they kind of portray the Nauvoo Legion as just this kind of like, not as serious as it actually was. Yeah, right there. Like the fact of the matter is like they were like about half the size of the federal US Army to like
Hmm.
many estimates. Like we've like can you really name another religion that has had a standing army in the United States that has been to war? Like we've had I think we've had like our religion has been in like about six wars. There was the 1838 Mormon War. Zion's Camp was a militia that was like fighting off mobs. The Utah War, of course, where they tried to overthrow Brigham Young. And basically we defeated the U.S. Army through like indirect guerrilla measures. And there's even some like really crazy conflicts. Like no one's really heard of the Morosite War, right? Um, there was like an apostate cultist that started his own religion, and there was a battle there up in South Weber between Brigham Young's territorial militia and this cult leader, and it was a battle. And I'm like, how come we don't talk about this? This is like, and there is a common theme, and like even in the Civil War, like we don't. There was you've heard of Lot Smith, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a cavalry company in this in the Union for the Union against the Confederates. And I'm just kind of like, why do we like shy away from this?
Yeah,
Like
it's
why?
almost like
Like
they almost like sweep it under the rug, or just like don't talk about it, like it's not, and that was something that really completely changed my perspective, was learning
yeah,
about like the Nauvoo Legion. Like nobody told me about that. Like,
yeah,
what I'm saying? Like, is this not prevalent to the story of the Restoration? I think it's something, it's a part of our history that if you don't understand what was like you won't get the full picture. You only get half of the picture, and you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And I think, especially with like the shooting that happened recently,
hmm,
I think it should be a big wake up that like we have, we're supposed to be a warrior in the garden, right? And I think what's happened is we've started to become gardeners in a war, you know?
yeah,
And if we don't wake up, we're gonna be in a bad situation.
yeah, 100%. Like, um, the Book of Mormon. Like, I personally don't believe that. Like, there's tons of conflict and warfare, for no reason. I think it's a huge theme of the Book of Mormon because in the last days, Joseph Smith taught that they will be um, persecutions, right? There's a quote that people debate, right? People debate this quote, but some people kind of think that Joseph Smith is like comparing himself to Muhammad. Some people, my interpretation of the quote
Mm.
is that like Muhammad was kind of seen as like a military um commander, right?
Yeah.
And like people were just like going after him. And he there was a quote that was said by Sidney Rigdon and a couple of the original witnesses in court that he purportedly said like in the last days I will be seen as the second, like I will be just as persecuted as him. And we can, and when you listen to recent general conference talks like Russell Nelson, he's like, you will not be able to survive spiritually, in the last days without the Book of Mormon and being true in the gospel. And we kind of are a bit of a doomsday religion, like why are we stockpiling almost $1 trillion? Like why are we told to store food? And I do believe that we will be persecuted more and more and more until the second coming.
Yeah, I think the quote he says, I will be like a second Muhammad unto this generation.
Hmm.
The Muhammad who said the Quran or the sword.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was.
Muhammad, yeah, he legit went to war with everybody.
Hmm.
Was in like 40 different battles and all this stuff.
Yeah,
The comparisons they try to make between him and Joseph Smith are
yeah.
just
I personally
laughable, but
don't believe he was praising Muhammad. I don't believe that. It was because he used the metaphor of a sword, so he was talking about it in the context of war, but like we know that like war is coming, like
yeah.
war, rumors of wars, all nations assembled, in Israel for battle. It's definitely something that should be on our minds, and I think than like it should be on our minds more than it currently is.
Yeah, I agree. It should be something that in the back of our mind we're like, we need to be prepared for this.
Yeah,
In that sense, that's what I think. And Christ even said, I have come not to bring peace, but a sword.
yeah.
And that people only ever want to talk about the loving, hippie, fake Jesus that they've made up. And they forget he also had a side of him that was all about justice. And I mean, before he appeared to the Nephites in the Americas, what does he do? Sinks the cities, burns the cities. He just brings absolute destruction upon the wicked.
Hmm.
And that's what's going to happen in the last days, right? And so it's like for me, going back and learning about the Nauvoo Legion, Joseph Smith, I'm like, as a church, we need to prepare ourselves because something's going to coming. Like you said, I don't think the persecution is going to get any less. I think it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and we're only seeing the beginning. I think it will get to the point where it was like in the days of old when the restoration first happened. That's the type of person, and who knows? I don't know, but I do think before the second coming, we could reach that point, you
Yeah,
know?
definitely. It's interesting how when you read like Isaiah and like kind of like the later prophecies of the Old Testament, like the Messiah does not sound like, and it's most of Isaiah is referring to the second coming, not his first. And it's like talks about his garments being stained with blood, smiting nations, trotting them down over his feet, fighting in battles, commanding armies. And that was the original reason why a lot of the Jews didn't think he was um, the Messiah. But as we know as Latter Day Saints, that Messiah is coming, and like Isaiah basically prophesies of a battlefield commander. He will lead the armies at Armageddon, at Gog and Magog. And these aren't like spiritual battles of words, right? Like he's talking about blood. It's talking about like people getting smitten. And it's 100% like warfare will be a theme of the last days.
Yeah. And there's that verse, I forget where it's at in the Doctrine and Covenants, where it's like talks about the inhabitants of Zion and how they'll be terrible. And it's basically saying how like it almost sounds in like a militant context of um them being afraid of Zion and being afraid of,
I've heard that.
yeah. And so yeah, that kind of brings us to what we're the other thing that kind of brings us to the situation that our country's facing right now, right? With all the wars in the Middle East constantly going on, it's a never-ending cycle. One leads into the next, and supposedly we're getting this ceasefire in Gaza, but it's and then there's just as soon as they have this, peace deal, more dying, and it's like, what's really going on here? I don't know. What are your thoughts on everything going on in Israel and in
You
the
know,
last days?
so it's, the Bible prophesies like all nations assembled against Israel for battle, right? And my kind of take on it, and this might ruffle some feathers, but you have to mess up pretty bad to get all nations assembled against you, And it's like when you like, I'm not denying that, that Israel historically has been God's chosen people. But there's a theme of like rebellion and captivity, right? And so, you had Assyrian, Babylonian, the Greeks came in, Persia, the Romans, and you can even argue that since then there's been captivities, right? And so, the Bible doesn't really like specify that like they will be a good people when all nations are assembled against them. They could very well be fallen into a state of pride and ignorance. And when you read Jesus the Christ by James E. Talmage, when he talks about how Jesus will split the Mount of Olives, he talks about it as if it's their last chance to repent. When they see the piercings in his, you know, hands and feet, um, it's it's a moment of repentance because, like, what I believe is what they're doing right now is I think they're in a fallen state of apostasy and pride. That's just
Yeah.
my opinion. Um, so one of my edits that got a lot of traction was one about a Orson Pratt discourse from the Journal of Discourses. I believe it was Journal of Discourses 14, page 353, around there. But he talks about it, and he doesn't paint Israel in a good, righteous light.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're always told, oh, they are God's chosen people. They're like, this is amazing. They've returned to all the Jews have returned to Israel. Now they're gonna like they're seen as like these mini saviors that are gonna like rush in the second coming.
Mm-hmm.
And when you really get into the topic, it almost couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if we read in Revelation, and there's two instances where the Lord says this in Revelation 2:9. I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not. And then he says, but are the synagogue of Satan. And then if we go to chapter 3, verse 9, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. So in that instance, he's talking to the church. So who are these? Who is he talking about then? Is the
Yeah.
question after I read that, and I think all things are starting to be revealed,
Mm.
right? And I think if we go to this discourse that you mentioned, it's going to tell us about that group.
Yeah.
They which they say they're Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is the Bible? What did the scripture say? They do lie, and
Mm-hmm.
they're the synagogue of Satan. So who is the synagogue of Satan? What I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen, and then we can go and read from um, Brother Orson
Yeah.
and see what he has to say about it. So give me one sec.
And I guess one thing I'll throw in, like while you pull this up,
Yeah.
is like we're seeing all nations assembled against them, right? Like we're seeing moves. Like when you look at a map of the countries that recognize Palestine, like in defiance of Israel, like it's almost the whole world except for us, you know? But we're seeing recent movements where Britain, the very founder of Israel, now alongside Australia and Canada and Portugal and France, all recognize Palestine in defiance as kind of a move against Israel. And so you're starting to see Europe moving against Israel. It got to the point where about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Spanish and Italians sent their navies to guard the flotillas against the Israeli navy. Like that's kind of unheard of, right? Like
Yeah.
Europe or NATO, they're supposed to be our allies. Why are they sending their ships against Israel? You know, why are they all of a sudden the very founders of Israel, you know, recognizing the state, which is like a symbolic defiance of them? And so, one part of this talk, yep, we just want
Yep.
up.
And here it is. Um, I think it's so let's go right. Okay, so I think here we go. This is from
Should be around 353, I
around
believe.
353, yeah. Um, and then there's another part I'll come back. Well, let's go to this part in 353, where he talks about this group of people that we were talking about, mentioned in Revelations 2:9 and 3:9, the people that
Mhm.
call themselves Jews, but they're actually not. This is a specific group of people, right?
Yeah. So wait, can you go to the top page? Yeah, so about right there. So it's interesting. Sorry, I'm gonna have to put my face a little bit close to the camera to read this. Um, so what's interesting is right. So as I discussed, we had, Europe is kind of making movements against Israel,
Right.
and
They've all come out and they're saying they're all condemning what's been happening in Gaza. Like pretty much all the nations literally except, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's just us and maybe one other country
yeah.
that's supporting them.
But when you look at this line right here, this is a direct quote from Orson Pratt. It says, while in a state of unbelief, Gog and Magog, which is like a place, the inhabitants of Russia, all those nations in Northern Europe and Northern Asia, which is I kind of interpret as China, will gather against the Jews before Jesus comes, and they will fill up the valley of Armageddon. So, arguably, not to say that like Europe is going to be on the same side as Russia and China, but they both equally are against Israel for a lot of the same reasons. And they're now, like China and Russia have always historically been anti-Israel because of their connection with us, the United States. But with this recent movement of Europe, I'm kind of interpreting it as the sign of the times, you know? And like as you mentioned before, um, who are these people, right? Like, is it I personally, and there's a very important line in here that um, there's a mention of the Rothschilds in this.
Yeah, if
You
we
know,
keep reading here, I'll continue it. Because this is a really important quote, and I really believe he was speaking by the Spirit. While in the state, right? So we read that part. We'll just read it again. While in that state of unbelief, Gog and Magog, the inhabitants of Russia and all those nations in northern Europe and northern Asia, a great multitude will gather against the Jews before Jesus comes, and they will fill up the valley of Armageddon, the great valley of Josaphat. And I'm pretty sure Josaphat means like to judge or something along judging. And then, and all the surrounding valleys, they will be like a cloud covering the land. Horses and chariots and horsemen, a very great army will gather up there to take spoil. For you know when the Rothschilds and the great bankers among the Jewish nation shall return back to their own land to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, carrying their capital with them, almost ruin some of the nations, and the
Oh,
latter will go up against Jerusalem to take a spoil. And
yeah.
yeah. So it mentions the Rothschilds, right? And the great Jewish bankers, right?
And so it's, we can all have our own interpretation of this, but it's very clearly, the Jewish state, because when you look, even the windows of the Israeli government buildings, who paid for them? It was the Rothschilds.
Yeah.
They throw their money into Israel. So my interpretation is, I don't think necessarily like every Jewish person is the synagogue of Satan. I personally don't even think Judaism is the synagogue of Satan. I personally like condemn forms of anti-Semitism, but my interpretation of this is that the synagogue of Satan is the nation of Israel.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that exactly. Like I don't have anything against any, just like I think having just this general hatred towards any group is just kind of stupid thinking.
Yeah,
Right? And so, but what we're saying here is there is a group that call themselves amongst the Jewish people, which call themselves Jews, but they're really not. They don't worship God. A lot of them are atheistic and they don't actually even believe in God, but they call themselves Jews still.
yep,
And they're the ones pushing a lot of evil things in this world, right? Um, we can talk about PORN. They're pushing that in a lot of the nations. We can talk about a lot of different things. We can transgenderism. This was the whole movement started in Germany in the 1930s with a man named Magnus Hirschfeld, who was I believe he was an atheistic Jew, and he started he did the first surgeries, he did all of that, and those were the books that they were burning, were about all that stuff. And so I believe that that's what it's talking about here is about the Rothschilds and these kind of elite, Jewish bankers and people who are pushing, you know, evil on the world through money, right? And what do we learn when we go to the temple, right? You can buy anything in this world with money, right? So this is the group that Revelation's talking
yeah,
about, right?
yeah. And some people use the term secular Jews. Um, you know, I personally think it's the nation state of government of Israel, and then the money that is supporting it, right? And that money is within our own government, right? So there was like I think Forbes in, I believe, 2018 reported that about 20% of billionaires were Jewish. Um, and that is why APAC, the um, what should be registered as a foreign lobby, you look at the amount of money that these, and the origin of this money comes from bankers, right? You know, they're the corporate world of America, is they dump money into APAC, which funds nearly every politician, both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and it's clearly serving a foreign interest, something that George Washington warned against in his very own farewell address.
Yes.
And you read the Federalist number 4, James Madison, he denounced the same thing. And
It's crazy because you look across the whole board and every politician, doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, whatever, almost all of them, except for maybe like five, a handful, Thomas Massey, a couple others, have been taking money from APAC. And then you look, and there's actually an organization that is that is dedicated to sending our politicians to go to trips to Israel for APAC. And so, and it's in this blurred lines where they can do it. And so I'm with you. I truly think that the synagogue of Satan mentioned here is the nation state, or in other words, like the government, right?
yeah,
Like I don't think all
those
Jewish
are
people are
fun.
bad at all. I think
Fun.
it's the government. It's their government, right?
Yeah, I think it's the government and the money
and the money. Yeah.
that um when you like you mentioned the temple, right? And I will buy up armies and navies, false priests who oppress, who rain on with blood and horror, right? It's crazy what's happening in Gaza. Even when you look at the low, and I'm particularly not, super pro Palestine. We can argue that they have their own, problems with, every country does. But it boggles my mind that like when you even look at the low estimates of civilians killed in Gaza in 2 years, like less than 2 years, has already surpassed the amount of civilians that have been killed in Ukraine, a war that's been going on, let's see, about 4 years now, involving countries with over, the population's total over 360 million. And then I believe it's about 15 million, the populations of Israel and Lebanon
Yeah.
combined. I could be wrong, but I think that's about right. But regardless, that the numbers are insane. How is it that this nation is killing more people than Vladimir Putin? It it's my, and where are they getting this money to buy up armies and navies? You know,
Yeah.
Getting it from these politicians that are funded by AIPAC.
Right.
They like as Israel commits more atrocities, they get funding packages. Like right after they bombed Qatar and killed 7 journalists, Trump approved sending it was like 40 Apache gunships through which he got through Congress. There's clearly like an influence in our government that's alarming. Whether you like Israel or not, it's hard to argue that it's not a foreign interest going against, the values of America.
Yeah. And for me, it doesn't matter. I don't care what country you're from. Like, this is the United States of America. We shouldn't be influenced or giving money to any nation that's not our country.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of that is the blackmail that's been going on, right? So, um, that's another thing. So I'm going to share my screen again. So here you have, um, Jeffrey Epstein, okay, in his IDF shirt, right? And we know that there's been a lot of a lot of things that have tied him back to being just to put it bluntly, a Mossad agent, right? And I don't know this for sure, right? But there's so many, like you guys do your own research, like there's so many connections, um, that there's a man named Alex Acosta, and back in, I believe it was 2009, Epstein had some charges against him for, for all the things we know that he did, right? For, prostituting out these women, not just that, right? But like getting these underage women and all this stuff. He had some charges against him. I don't remember the exact charges, but this judge, his name's Alex Acosta. He was told by somebody he let him off with a slap of the wrist, and Epstein was just right back to what he was doing. And when someone asked Alex Acosta, he said, "Well, somebody in the government told me he was intelligent, so I needed to leave him alone."
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's so many evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was running a blackmail operation for an intelligence agency. That So what we have happening in the United States of America is we have politicians, not just in the U.S., but also, there's Prince Andrew, in
Syndicate
the
was huge.
UK, right? That
You
have been, yeah, go ahead.
you even had, Speaker, was it Mike Johnson? He suggested, you know, that he didn't say it directly, but he um suggested that the Epstein list couldn't be released because people, on the list were acting as intelligence agents. We don't know for sure if it was Mossad, but there's seriously signs that are pretty alarming that this network goes beyond just, oh, this billionaire decided to do horrible things to young women. No, he was powerful. He had influence over the royal family, right? He was in the pockets of every politician. Not hardly you can't find a single politician that doesn't have a picture with Jeffrey Epstein. He he was more than a guy abusing women. He was
Right.
a power. You look at his wealth. You think Donald Trump was rich? Just do a quick Google search on his wealth. It's insane.
Yeah. And the more you dig into it, the more connections you find and the more things you find. And so this is the state that we find our country in is we have politicians being blackmailed by a foreign government and then being funded and having their campaigns funded by a foreign government, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, this whole situation describes the nation state as for I'm and speaking as the government, not the people, right? The government of Israel and the people running their government is, I believe, it's literally the secret combination that we are warned of in the Book of Mormon, right? I think this is what Moroni saw, and you're right, because when you read it, it talks about, what does it talk about? The daughter of Jared going and dancing before Akish and pleasing him, right? So, what do you think pleasing means, right? She just did some dancing and that was it? No, right? So, you have this element in there of in secret combinations of this sexual element, right? Of this act or whatever's going on. And then they form, and then because of that, they then go and form a secret combination or they make oaths and things to protect each other. If anybody murders, you can't say anything, right? And so to me, it just perfectly describes what's going on right now, you
Yeah.
know?
The APAC on their website, they brag that the politicians they fund have a 98% chance of winning. It's almost like they can't have jobs without an entity that serves Israel. That's on the website. That's no conspiracy theory. It's it blows my mind. It blows my mind how, you know, I haven't lost hope in America, but like Ezra Taft Benson, the Constitution will hang by a thread. Secret combinations of darkness. We can interpret it in different ways, but this is clearly an alarming trend.
Yes, to say the least. It's for me, I just ask like we should never lose hope in the because this is the United States of America, right? Like God has a plan for our country and America needs to succeed, but there's so much good and at the same time there's so much evil and wickedness, right? And it's like I think we can all feel something in the air, like something's coming, right? And
Yeah.
obviously we know the Lord's going to come back, but before that point, there's going to be some mayhem, right? That's going to come. And so I find it interesting how the Lord has his right is trying to right Zion has to be built. Before Christ comes, we have to build up Zion, a Zion people, a people that are ready for him, right? In the scriptures it talks about Zion as um they were of one heart and one mind. It said here it is. And the Lord called his people Zion because they were of one heart and one mind and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. So that was Zion back in Enoch's day, and it's interesting how Satan always tries to mimic, right? So how the Lord has covenants and tokens and signs we make in the temple, Satan also uses those things, right? Same with and then we look at like Zionism, right? Zionism, right? It's this there's the real Zion that the Lord's trying to establish. Joseph Smith tried to establish it. The people weren't ready for the law of consecration and all that. And then now again,
They use
Satan has his counterfeit,
they use
right?
this right, and one is incorporate. They both believe they're the house of Israel. One is through baptism and covenant, and The other is kind of an exclusive, group with lots of money and military power. What's interesting is that when Joseph Smith said, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, the kind of evangelical interpretation of this is, oh, well, like, the rich people will be last and the poor people will be first. Joseph Smith actually clarified that it was like the Jews that would be last to, like, inherit the gospel, and the Gentiles would be first, referring to, the restoration of the gospel through the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Because, how I see it is that the tribe of Judah is in a state of apostasy. They're in a state of pride. As Netanyahu, he follows a very long trend of arrogant kings of Israel, that were smitten into captivity. But, we know from the scriptures, we know from the temple that Satan will have an army of blood and horror. And who's causing the most, militaristically and geopolitically, with like an endless budget to do whatever he wants, whatever horrors, it's the nation of Israel. That's my interpretation, So,
And
right,
it's sad because it's on sorry. It's sad because it's on the back of like for example, before we went into Iraq to go, what did they tell us? There's weapons of mass destruction. There's all these things. So we have to go and we have to take down Saddam Hussein, right? So the way they've gotten America involved is through lies, through lying, straight lying to us, to the American people. And we've spent trillions and trillions of dollars. We've indebted our nation. We've destroyed the future. They've stolen our future, right? Our generation and are the younger generation. And at the same time, millions of Iraqis, that like a million Iraqis, I don't know what the exact numbers are,
yeah,
like a million Iraqis died, and thousands of Americans as well, all off of all so that they could, so that the Revelation 2:9, the Revelation 3:9 people could get what they want.
Yep.
Right.
And I kind of believe the right is waking up to this, like when I tell my family my views in Israel, they're like, oh, are you going to go to the, with all the blue haired people pro-Palestine, at a university? And like, no, I'm kind of seeing like the right is, starting to ask questions. I personally don't think, I don't have evidence to conclude that Israel killed Charlie Kirk, but he himself and lots of prominent conservative voices are starting to question, like, why do we have this staunchly, unrelenting, unbreakable tie to Israel no matter what they do? USS Liberty. Why don't we talk about that in school? We talk about 9/11. We talk about Pearl Harbor. We basically talk about the Lithuania that started, World War I. Any time in history where like a U.S. ship has gotten attacked, the Gulf of Tonkin, I remember learning about that in Vietnam. Like, why don't we talk about the USS Liberty when that incident killed more U.S. sailors than a lot of the incidents that I just listed? It's not up there with Pearl Harbor, but it was the whole ship. And they lied. They covered it up. It was clearly, a false flag operation, in my opinion, to provoke further U.S. conflict in the Middle East. Because that, I kind of had this original like view that like, oh, all Muslims are bad, and like we, but like the word that the Muslims use for us is like crusader, right? And they kind of see it as the continuation of the Crusades. And how I was kind of taught these conflicts in school was that like this is kind of like a continuation of the Crusades, but they don't mention, you know, the fact that before 1948, the Arabs were staunchly our allies. Going back to the Barbary Wars, like
Yes.
they tried to help us get the Prince of Morocco, the Sultan of Morocco. He was the first person to recognize U.S. independence. He said, "I will not allow British ships to take U.S. sailors." Lawrence of Arabia got all the Arabs to fight for the American cause against the Central Powers. They fought for us in World War II. Um, Over 200,000 Arabs died fighting for us for the Axis powers. They were our allies for the longest time. I'm not talking about the Ottomans. I'm talking about the Arabs.
Yeah.
Their distinction. Um, Yet when we use them as meat shields to take down our enemies, and then we take their holiest land and give it to this arrogant shadow group with seemingly endless money that has influence on our media, our propaganda, our pop culture. Why is it that with the creation of Israel, now all of a sudden everyone hates us?
Yeah.
The Arab world hates us. It's like you don't really it's like you don't see a common theme here. I'm not the biggest fan of the Arab world, but the formation. It's interesting when you read about Lawrence of Arabia because he refused knighthood by the queen because of how we treat the Arabs, and he foresaw all of this happening.
Yeah. And when you actually start studying into it, it's interesting. Like when you study into the foundation of the country, the state of Israel. So in 19, so the Balfour Declaration, right? That's how, um, so basically the Rothschilds, that's how they got the U.S. to enter World War One, was through the Balfour Declaration. So they made a deal, basically, the Jewish bankers, with I don't know if it was with the king or if it was with of Britain or the government, basically, and they sold them because Palestine used to be under the British mandate.
Yeah.
So it used to be under their control, and then they basically sold it to these bankers. And then that's when a lot more Jews started going back to Israel. There had kind of been this Zionist movement, and when I say Zionist, I'm talking about the idea that the Jew, like, Palestine is the homeland to anybody who calls himself a Jew. Um, so that's with the Balfour Declaration. They It was a way that they were going to use their power and influence in the media in the United States of America to get the Americans to enter the war in 1917, because the war was going to come to an end. It was coming close to an end, but it wasn't going the way the British wanted. So here comes Lord Rothschild, and he's like, I can get the Americans to come in and enter this war for you guys, right? That's how powerful these people are,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they also sold our nation out. Our nation got sold out when they created the Federal Reserve back in 1913, right? Like it's called the Federal Reserve, but it's not federal at all. It's a bunch of
And it's not
private banks. Yeah. And so basically what's happened is for a long time, very specific groups of people have had all the money and all the power, and they've been funding all the wars. Like World War One was funded on both sides by two brothers,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Not that, but that is interesting.
And so, yeah, it's this. There's so much going on that people don't realize, and the way they've gotten to people, what they don't want people to do is to ask questions,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why it's like these are like everybody knows they're God's chosen people, right? They all about the Holocaust, about all of these things, um, because it's a way to divert attention away from other important things in historical context. Like, for example, the IDF, it was founded, they were the first ones to do terrorism. They bombed the King David Hotel, right? With a bunch of innocent people there. I'm pretty sure there was like Americans, British, and Arabs there, and they bombed it, right? And so that, like, they literally did the terrorism and started it, and that became eventually the IDF. So when you start really digging into things like the truth, it's not so black and white, you know? And again, it's not like we're saying, there's plenty of amazing, really good, intelligent, Jewish people that do a lot of good around the world, right?
Yeah. For people that are using their name.
Right. And so, yes, but there are this small group of bad individuals among them that use the name that call themselves Jews, but they don't really try to follow God or follow the Torah or, you know, it's very secular.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to believe that, like, if Israel was never created, right? Let's say they'd established a Jewish homeland in Germany, which some, politicians at the time wanted to do. It's hard for me to believe that, like, all these wars in the Middle East would have happened, It, like, all the whole Arab world, like, they use the rhetoric of Israel, the existence of Israel, to fuel, you know, terrorist acts against the United States. And I guess where I was kind of going with it before was, like, my point was, like, the Arab world is our allies, and then all of a sudden with
Yeah.
Israel enemies,
Yeah.
it's it's like a trend that you can't even deny, that they, whether directly or indirectly, are the source of just an entire century of wars in the Middle East.
Yeah. No, and I don't think, and that's a good point. I didn't mean to get us too off topic there, but they, like, without the state, the nation state of Israel, like America, like, what would we have ever been in the Middle East? Would we have been in
Would
all
not,
these wars?
like,
Right? Yeah. Would 9/11 happen and dancing Israelis and all that?
yeah, and it's like, there's people that, like, I personally, don't believe that Israel, like, did 9/11. I know some people do. But what I do believe is that if Israel never existed, 9/11 wouldn't have happened. Osama bin Laden used the rhetoric of the existence of Israel to attack us,
Yeah.
right? And, they say they're our closest allies. It's like, where were you when we invaded Iraq? You said it was so necessary for us to invade Iraq. You weren't there. Poland sent people of all countries. Polish troops invaded Iraq with us. You
Mm.
had the French in Afghanistan, the Germans, Australians. You know, most of our NATO allies had sent troops at one point, yet the dudes wanting us to go in didn't send a single soldier. They just wanted us to fight their battles. And these wars did nothing. They accomplished nothing.
Nothing. The only thing,
Iraq, thing.
nothing.
Afghanistan it's still run by the Taliban. And you have to ask the question, like, is this entity, they call themselves the Jews, which I interpret as Israel, are they doing more harm? It begs the question, are they doing more harm than good? Clearly,
Yes.
the 20th century lens, it's been nothing but problems, nothing but chaos.
Yeah. And and the way they've been able to maintain control for so long is through wielding their power and their money and their influence. And I think now it's like the veil's starting to be lifted and people are starting to see, like, maybe that Austrian painter guy, maybe, I'm not saying everything he did was great, but maybe he did point out some issues and some problems that we're now starting to see, in our own country, and so I think what's really cool to me though was just to kind of bring it all full circle was that talk that you made a reel about.
Yeah.
Um, just seeing that because Um, one sec. So, because in that, there's a lot of good information about what's going to happen in these last days. I mean, it's crazy because he literally even mentions this group, right, of the Rothschilds. And when I read that, I was like, wow, this
And the
guy
Roth
was within tune with the spirit, you know?
the Rothschilds were not as powerful back then.
No.
They did not have that level of influence. How did he know that, Russia in 1830 and China in 1830? Or when was the sermon? Sorry, I could be getting the date wrong. 18. Okay, around the late 1830s, 1840s.
Discourse, March 10th, 1872.
Yeah. So it's like the Rothschilds, Northern Asia, which, is clearly China, and Russia were not powerful at the time. Russia had they barely beat Napoleon a couple years before that. China was, soon to be divided amongst the European powers. The Rothschilds were just this kind of family of Jewish almost nobility that, weren't as powerful as the monarchs around them. But then you look at it today, next to the United States, China and Russia are the most powerful nations in the world. And the Rothschilds are the richest people in the world. There's no way he could have known that. Like, that is so clearly prophetic that he would predict that, they would represent the power of the world that would assemble against Israel.
Yeah, and that it would bankrupt some of the nations and it's what it's doing to ours. All these wars we fought in the Middle East, trillions and trillions of dollars, like the inflation too. It's all a direct result of this. So, but yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate you guys. For anybody listening all the way through, hope you learned something. We're just a couple of young bucks trying to figure everything out ourselves, what's going on in this crazy world. So, yeah, go study this talk by I'll share it one more time in case there's anybody else here, just so they can see. So yeah, you can look up, it's from volume 14 of the Journal of Discourses, page 343 to 346. So go check it out, um and I know you'll learn a lot. We really do have prophets and seers and revelators. So thanks,
Amen.
Nauvoo Legion. And any last words there,
Nope.
Ross, Latter-day Avenger?
Study it, scriptures are open to, as long as they don't contradict prophets and apostles of the modern era, we can have our own interpretations of this. And, I hope that this laid out some connections that are in line with church doctrine. So thanks for listening.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks for coming on. Till next time, Nauvoo Legion.